Hello and welcome to the June 22nd meeting of the Thurston Regional Housing Council. Let me start with introductions. I'm representing the city of Lacey. We have our mayor, there's our alternate representative, Andy Ryder, who looks like he's trying to zoom in. We have city manager Scott Spence. We have our community and economic development manager Rick Walk, and the wonderful Kelly Adams. Have I missed anybody from Lacey? All right, why don't we go to Olympia next? Danny?
Hi everybody, Danny Madrone with the City of Olympia. I believe I am here all by myself today, but I'll let you know if somebody pops on.
All right. How about Tumwater?
Thanks, Carolyn. Michael Altauser, Tumwater City Council, joined by my friend and colleague, Joan Cathy, and also Brad Medrud from our planning department.
And I'll just note that Keith Staley just jumped on from Olympia. Thanks, Keith.
Hi, Keith. All righty. And Thurston County, we have Carolina Mejia.
Yes, Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner. And with me today, I have Tom Webster, Keely Marino, Jacinda Stelgis, and Megan Porter on the attendees list. I think that's all.
All right. We got Yelm represented today. Not hearing Brian, so, okay. I guess not. All right. So has everybody have a chance to take a look at the agenda? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to approve or amend, either way.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, let's move to approve. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, agenda passes. We have several people lined up for public comment today. So, gosh, I'm gonna have to get out of this to get to my list. I'm sorry. Not it. Okay, we will start with Lisa Stridinger, Outreach and Case Management Services. Lisa, are you with us? Not seeing her signed in. Okay.
She's just promoted as a panelist and she'll be able to speak now.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa. Thank you for taking time. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Lisa and I am the director of a nonprofit called Friends Without Homes, and I work in Lewis County, Washington. And I'm just here to bring Lewis County in to try to learn new things and try to share with my community what we're doing here. I don't know if my community is represented here, but I like to just learn new things and bring them to my leaders because we're working really hard on housing there. I also work in Olympia at one of the tiny home camps, and I'm just phenomenally amazed at what the community is doing. And I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you guys are doing there. And you'll be seeing more of me. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am a person who has lived experience in homelessness, as well as education in chemical dependency and co-occurring disorders. And I love my job and just working with the community, experiencing homelessness and trying to find them permanent housing is my job. So just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome. I'm glad you could join us. Next, we have Philip Jenkins, who wants to talk about funding OLIMAP. Philip, are you here? Okay, I see Philip on the attendees list. Philip, are you there?
We're moving him into the meeting to allow him to speak right now.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Philip. Are you on mute? You have your opportunity to speak to address the Regional Housing Council.
Philip, are you there? Well, why don't we try going to the next speaker, and we'll give Philip a chance at the end. Next is Randy Morrow. I see him on the attendees. While we're waiting, Philip, are you there? I see your box is lit there. Are you trying to? Okay. It's like, okay, Philip, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? All right, let's try Randy. Randy, if you're there, can you unmute and has Randy been promoted to speak?
Yes, Randy's in the meeting. And Randy, if you want to unmute yourself, you have the opportunity to address that Regional Housing Council.
Well, we seem to be having trouble for whatever reason. Let's move on to Jimmy Matson.
Okay, I think there it is. All right, thank you. Sorry, the other folks haven't gotten a chance to talk. Maybe they can come back. I'll be brief. Really excited for the progress you're making on the overview level with the retreat and the aftermath of that. So big thanks for that. You're the closest thing we have to a coordinating body for homelessness in the area. And yes, we have the hat and the HHH, yet what you're contemplating doing with your changing your authority is important and can speak to this need for coordination that's been spoken of so often. We lack a statewide governor level authority or even not even a rep in their office that's specifically concerned with homelessness. And that's unfortunate because it's so pressing. So you have Build for Zero and also the Anchor Community Initiative to work with to build a coordinating capacity that's been lacking. And I trust you ended up talking about that at the retreat. So what I wanted to do is just actually introduce you to looking at the mitigation site as it moves over to Quinn Street, since it's as a transitional facility for the area. And since Olympia is, as was said, is like the epicenter, it's fitting to regard support for this higher level of work, which helps all the jurisdictions. So the Regional Housing Council could give a little extra, keep an extra eye on this and look at it as a transitional facility and not just another tiny home village. I'd suggest supporting that space as an entry and stabilizing in a very transitional place for the folks experiencing the chronic homelessness for them to gain access to aggressively provided services. And I know, yes, we're short of service providers and social workers and case managers, but this is basically a great jobs program waiting to happen. And the good news is the money is there now at the state level for scaling up the existing agency response to meet this need for the first time. So I just wanted to also say, if we could add this to the one-stop shop type of entry-level facility with all the agencies represented, very much like the Providence Community Care Center was before it shifted in 2020, in July 2020, when the pandemic hit. This could be just the thing to really help coordinate much of this important activity that you're so involved with. And it complements your work procuring more permanent supportive housing units, whether the hotel buys or other building projects. Lastly, I just wanted to put in a plug to find an area-wide way to support Lacey and thus also the other jurisdictions in the area in doing so, to reapproach the unused Sears building and parking lot at the north end of the South Sound Center. It obviously would make an ideal safe parking spot for RVs once properly supported and with appropriate resources, which again, I believe are finally available through the state. It seems prudent to revisit this option. So I'd love to hear from any of you on this, whether in the session today or privately. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jimmy. I'm going to try one more time to bring on our other two speakers. Philip Jenkins.
So I talking to my headphones.
If you can, I think it is.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you now.
thank you. Sorry, we had a problem with the audio last time. Okay, my name is
Understood.
Philip Jenkins. I'm from the Olympia area, and I would like to talk about the funding going to the OLIMAP. Right now, there are the only resources out there for the people that's on the streets. Without governing them, they give these people their free will to live the way they want to live, handle their own problems while supplying supplies and things that's needed in the real workplace. They also have been very good in helping people find jobs, get off the streets, get housing. Like me, I just recently received housing, and it was all through my case manager that I was able to receive this, because a lot of us out here on the streets, because we have been on the streets, don't necessarily have the rental history or the employment history to be able to put down. So the case managers has been a very, very good help in that effort. They're also really good at influencing us to like better ourselves and, do something that's gonna matter, make an example instead of being a problem. So without the help from OLIMAP, I feel that things are gonna get a lot worse than it has in the last couple of years. Because in the last couple of years, last 3 or 4 years, it has just gotten humongously bad. People from all over are coming here, cities complaining about all these different problems, but nobody really wants to come up with a solution besides making these mitigation camps that honestly is not really they're inhumane. I mean, who wants to be behind a locked gate and stuff like that? There's a lot of people out there that just wants to live like they live in a home. And they're able to do that up until involvement from the city. And the city wants to push everybody out, but there's nowhere for us to go. And a lot of people don't want to be housed. OLIMAP comes in and they help us handle the problems that we're having with the city amongst ourselves. They help us live like humans again, and they respect us as people. And that is a lot of the reasons why the homeless population has had less problems, I would say. Less people on the streets. Since OLIMAP has been open, there have been more people getting off the streets and being healthy, less deaths. So we need them around. We need them around big time, along with another company, Pipe. They also have been a very big help. A lot of people think living on the streets, the people out here are bad, this and that people. But when the people from OLIMAP come by and see us, they don't look at us like that. They look at us like humans. I mean, people who want to live a life, who wants to be productive, but just hasn't been given that chance to, because they're being judged before they've even been, people get to know them. That's pretty much it.
All right. Philip, thank you for sharing that. And I'm really glad that you've had good experience with Only Map. It's great. Okay, Randy Morrow, one more try here.
Okay, how you doing?
I don't see Randy in the attendees list anymore. I don't know if he ended up leaving the Zoom and is looking to reconnect, but he's no longer in the attendees list.
Okay,
I think you can speak now.
Can you hear me now?
is this Randy?
Yes, this is Randy.
Oh,
Okay, yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, just to pick up a little bit more from part of this. I'm homeless, but I'm not on drugs or nothing like that. People get the idea that we are pretty bad people because we homeless. We don't have nothing on the mountain. But that's not necessarily true. We have a lot of talent out there. Holy Map brings us supplies as far as those who are on drugs. We got a place to put the dirties. They bring stuff so people don't have to use dirty stuff. They does a lot of things that most people wouldn't even have an idea of what's really going on. And to touch bases on the homeless that's left out there, they got so many open buildings that's not even being occupied. I think that would be a great thing to do, to purchase a couple of these buildings and get the rest of these homeless people off. It's just like, it's not, we just had a bill and it went so far, and then you got this much left out here. They don't have homes yet. I'm a little upset about that, but this is the capital. But what are we gonna do about that? We have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of talent. But we like to share that. We like to work with that. Whatever it takes to work with the city, you're down to work with the city too. I guess that's all I have to say about that.
All righty. Well, thank you for hanging in there and joining us, Randy. And sorry about the audio difficulties. And
It's okay.
I just want to acknowledge that we've had 3 speakers now who have some lived experience of homelessness, and I'm really excited to have that participation at our meeting today. So thank you all so much for being here. And before we move on, I want to acknowledge that Brian Hess from Yelm has joined us. So welcome, Brian. And excuse me, just one quick minute. I've got to get back to my agenda. There we go. Sorry about this. It's a little bit awkward where I am trying to deal with that. So next up is approval of our June 8th minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second. This is
All right.
Michael.
Been moved by Carolina, seconded by Michael to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. And has Ty Gundel joined us?
she should be joining the RHC as a panelist here. Quickly, here she is.
Momentarily, okay. All right, there's Ty. Hi, Ty. Ty Gundel,
You.
Holy Map is going to give us a presentation on the scattered site program. So welcome, Ty.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Carolyn. Good to see you all again. And thank you to everyone on the council for making time for us to have a presentation this week. We're glad to be back again. My name is Tyler Gundel. For those of you who don't know me, I also go by Ty, and I am one of the co-founders and co-director for Olympia Mutual Aid Partners, with a focus on program development and policy coordination. And outside of my time with OLIMAP, I have worked in Thurston County in the field of homeless outreach services since about 2013.
Cool. My name is Jenny Milchenko. I go by Jenny. I use she, they pronouns. I am the quality assurance data analyst, which in normal terms basically just means that I'm the person that helped develop the goals and objectives of the scattered site program, helped with tracking our measures and also analyzing the data, doing the reports, as well as assisting with general strategic planning for moving forward. Before working with OLIMAP, I've worked in Olympia at CYS, doing downtown outreach. And so I'm familiar with the community here, and we're just really happy that you made some time for us today.
And we do have a PowerPoint to go along with this presentation. I can't see if we do have screen sharing capabilities yet.
I think yes.
Yes, we do. So one moment, I'll get that pulled up.
Thank you for your patience. There we go.
Seems to be the theme of the day.
I know, right? Always.
Okay.
All right. So we are going to get started today with an introduction to OLIMAP and an overview of the Scattered Site project and the programs and services provided through it. And from there, we will have Jenny go through some of our program outcomes and program challenges, as well as updates on the challenges that we talked about during our 6-month review with you all. And also we will go into some key insights, findings, and hopeful next steps for our programs going forward. So to start, who is OLIMAP? For those of you who are less familiar with OLIMAP, OLIMAP is a relatively new locally based homeless services organization that works primarily with adults and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness, specifically those living in unsanctioned camp communities. We provide 2 types of core services, case management and site support. Through our case management services, participants are able to access a variety of services, including but not limited to housing, shelter, access to coordinated entry, medical, mental health, substance use and harm reduction services, income, employment, legal assistance, identification, transportation, etc. Our caseworkers are out at the camps that they work with 2 to 3 times per week. And also just to keep to our commitment to making sure our services are accessible to those we are contracted to serve, we offer a variety of case management services ranging from more intensive case management to lower intensity case management, like our Basic Connections program. All of our caseworkers have a limit of 10 on their caseload, and that's to promote both sustainability of the work we do, but also most importantly, it's about quality of services. And all of our case management services are participant led. Our site support program is focused on working with camp communities as a whole to promote the overall health, stability, safety, and general well-being of the folks living at the camps. This includes general outreach, information sharing, assisting with reduction of problems and challenges associated with camp communities, and providing site advocacy support. And another really critical part of our site support program is connecting the residents with additional resources and services. So all of our site support workers are also able to assist residents with information and resource sharing, referrals to social and health services, connection to essential supplies like food, water, shelter supplies, safer heating, laundry. They're able to support folks with communication of concerns and problem solving among stakeholders, facilitating community meetings, completing coordinated entry, and also, when appropriate, providing collective management or self-governance support. So in June of 2021, OLIMAP was contracted with Thurston County to provide these services to specific camp communities in the area. And this project was carried out as part of the regional effort to develop and apply more effective responses to unsheltered homelessness and unsanctioned camps. And the primary goals of this project were to, 1, reduce the broader impacts of unsheltered homelessness by supporting camp safety, stability, and health in the places where people are sheltering in the absence of alternative options for places for people to go. And this is also referred to as shelter in place. And of course, the other primary goal of the project was to connect people experiencing homelessness homelessness with alternative and more appropriate shelter and housing options. And from there, I'm going to turn it to Jenny, and she's going to take you through some of our program outcomes for the pilot.
Cool, thanks, Ty. So just really briefly, we wanted to give you kind of an overview of who we've worked with, where we've worked, and around how many participants that we have worked with throughout the year. So you'll see the numbers. They don't necessarily identify how many people are currently at each site because, you know, people do move around from site to site. It's more meant to be a general guideline for how many folks we've worked with at each camp. So Ensign Road, we've worked up to 67 residents there. Nickerson and some of the smaller Wheeler encampments on the WashDOT side, also around 60 residents that we've interacted with. The previous Deschute encampment, it was well known to be a larger encampment, around 80 to 100 residents. And after the sweep occurred, we did follow around 70 of those participants that were put into the various hotel stays and continue to provide services. And Ty will talk a little more about that later. We also, after the Deschute sweep, created a roving team, which was then able to go to different places within Thurston County to provide more services to some of the smaller camps. So we've interacted with about 53 more residents, including from Percival Creek, Decatur Woods, and some of the west side encampments. We also have a new program called the Stability Stays Hotel Program, which isn't part of the scattered site necessarily, but also part of the OLIMAP programs, and we have helped 35 residents through that program. And additionally, we have a new site that we adopted in the last few months, New Hope Camp at the First Christian Church, and currently there are 7 residents there. So what we really want to talk about here, Ty went over kind of like the larger goals and objectives of the Scattered Site project. But in addition to that, we also had some of our own goals and objectives for the program. You know, we knew from the start that we really wanted to be very intentional and clear about what we were setting out to do. And we really wanted to be as data-driven as possible in our approach. And by being data-driven, I mean that, you know, we wanted to do our best to collect as much data as we could about our programs that was feasible so that we would be able to properly track how we're doing, show with stakeholders how we're doing, if we were meeting our goals, and if not, what were the barriers to meeting those goals. So as you can see in the above table, it's sort of an overview of our case management objectives that we had in the original proposal. Excuse me. So I'm not going to go over everything, and I'll have time to read it. But basically what I do want to point out is that you can see that under the actual outcome, we were able to meet all of our case management objectives that we had set out to meet. And we'll go a little bit more into detail with that when I provide you with the case management section of our outcomes. But we really just want to acknowledge like the hard work that our case managers did this year. I think it's really easy to see the results of their hard work by how well we've been able to meet our goals. Next, we want to go a little bit over our original site support goals and objectives for the program. So the objectives and outcomes for the site support program are a little bit more complex. Later in the presentation, Ty will share a little bit more about the challenges that impacted our capacity to implement site support at our sites. But just briefly, we'll say that we weren't able to implement site support in the way that we would have liked because of several external factors that basically made it impossible for us to kind of accurately test and observe the site support outcomes at the site. So we just want you to keep that in mind as you're looking at this table. So our first objective was for the sites we worked with to show improved stability, safety, and health. And based on participant feedback on our end of year report, participants indicated that we made a marked improve on their safety and well-being and services at their camp. Unfortunately, we haven't observed or had any reported to us from residents any improvement in site stability. And again, Ty will talk about that a little bit later. The second objective that you can see was we wanted to see an increase essentially in conflict mediation in the camps. Due to sweeps and threats of sweeps, it's very difficult to stabilize camps or increase stability when there are external factors impacting the ability for stability to occur. Confusing to say. But we also realized too through the program that trying to measure conflict is a really difficult thing to measure. So instead of measuring conflict for our success in the program, we have shifted it to be measuring other indicators of camp stability. So more of the specific outcomes then that we made during the project. What does the data show? So here's kind of an overview of some of the main points. Overall, we've worked with about 15 camp communities, and overall, that's about 250 residents that we have been able to work with. Just as an interesting note, the 2020 PIT count had, I think, 995 individuals that they identified as currently homeless, which means that according to those numbers, we had contact with approximately 25% of the unhoused population in Thurston County, according to the last PIT count. The percentage of people who engaged in case management was 60% of our participants. We made over 470 referrals. We completed over 280 applications. And one of our favorite statistics is that of those people who we've worked with, 31 of them have been able to move on to improved shelter or housing situations, which is about 15% of all of the residents that we have worked with since July of last year. So just talking really specifically about intensive case management, and intensive case management is, you know, the processes that are more complex, like applying for housing, applying for Social Security, the things that take a long time and that require a lot of appointments. So over the entire year, we had 55 people engaged in intensive services, which is 22%. 60% of those folks completed coordinated entry. And what we think is interesting, of all the folks who did move into housing, 87% or 83% were enrolled in intensive case management. And for the 17% that was not included in intensive case management, they were enrolled in either the low intensity or basic connections case management. So really every single person who moved into housing was in case management, which we think is probably a good indicator of the importance of how having consistent on-site case management really does lead to better housing outcomes for individuals who are trying to get off the streets. Right now, we have currently 39 people who are enrolled in case management, actively working on processes. So now I just want to go a little bit more detail with the referrals that we completed this year. So as I mentioned, we did a little over 473 exact from when I did the calculation. We broke our referrals down into categories so we could get an idea for the types of services that people were requesting. And by far, you can see the top three are medical referrals, legal referrals, and then housing related referrals, which also tied with basic needs. And, you know, we really would like to point out here, just as we did in the 6-month review, that our data shows that it's really important for individuals to have their basic needs and human rights met really before they have the capacity or the ability to work on other needs, such as drug treatment or job searches or enrolling back in school. Those are things that often necessitate other processes to happen before they can engage with those processes. Next, I just want to talk about some of the applications. Similar to referrals, we kind of broke them up into categories to get a feel for what the most common types of applications were. So absolutely by far, the biggest ones were applications for identification, which include, you know, driver's license, state IDs, replacement IDs, birth certificates, kind of basic documentation, as well as phones. So either application for a phone or an application to replace a phone. And then third, housing, coordinated entry, Section 8, housing vouchers, anything related to housing. So yeah, we again point out it's really hard to do anything without having your ID, and it's really hard to do anything without having a phone or a way to connect or keep track of all the other things going on in life. So it really shows that like folks are really reaching for those first basic things that they need first before doing other things. So some of the site support outcomes, we did mention earlier that even though we weren't really able to implement site support in the way that we really wanted to in the program, we still did have a lot of really positive outcomes from the aspects of the program that we did have control over. Some of those include that we've been able to weatherize over 20 dwellings, and weatherization, if you're not aware, means basically taking a dwelling and making it more, how would you say, weather ready, rain resistant, snow resistant, insulated, things like that. We've been able to repair over 15 vehicles through our mobile mechanic program, specifically with Ensign Road. A lot of those vehicles were fixed by our site support worker on Ensign. We've been able to host over 65 community meetings throughout the year at the campsites. As I mentioned earlier, we adopted a new site, the New Hope Tiny Village, where we're now providing site support and self-governance as well. And then residents overall did report improved access to resources and services and an improved sense of safety because of OLIMAP intervention. And so I'm just going to go a little bit more into detail with that last thing I just read. So at the end of the year, we did an end of year survey on Ensign Road and Wheeler, basically just to get a feel of how they felt we did, what they thought of our services, how they thought we could improve. And one of the questions we asked was, how did we impact safety at your camp? And 55%, even though we didn't really have site control, you know, we would have loved to have had more site control, been able to make decisions, but we didn't have that. So even with the limited site control that we had, over half the residents at Wheeler and Ensign did feel like we made a substantial impact on their sense of safety at their camps. For example, we have some quotes from residents. I won't read them all. You can read them, but you know, I think without them, we wouldn't have had a camp. Their presence, I feel, stops a lot of the nonsense. We had several comments in the surveys talking about how they felt that our presence, just our presence alone, made the nonsense go down. Next, we did ask too about how participants felt about improving access to resources. We asked them, did you feel like OLIMAP impacted your access to resources? And 82% of Wheeler residents and 65% of Ensign residents reported that they felt that we helped improve their connection to very important services and resources. For example, if it wasn't for OLIMAP, I may have never gotten supplies for myself like clothes, propane, a stove, etc. I may have never gone to the doctor like I needed either. I think if it wasn't for OLIMAP, a lot of services would not be used due to the lack of communication abilities. So we had it was nice to get this feedback on our end of year surveys to hear. And the statistic that we really want to share is that overall 93% of Ensign Road residents and, sorry, this is cut off, 81% of Nickerson Wheeler residents reported that they want us to continue working with their camp in the future.
Thank you, Jenny. And so now we've gone through some of those. I'm going to take us through some of the barriers and updates on challenges that we talked about in our 6-month review. So during our 6-month review, we talked about a number of challenges and barriers that were impacting the pilot project, including the general crisis-driven reactionary approach, sweeps and displacement, lack of alignment in goals, expectations, and roles among some project stakeholders, absence of site control or decision-making authority at sites, specifically with OLIMAP and residents, and also staff burnout. And during when we talked to you all in January last, we also talked about some recommendations for addressing these challenges. And since that review, we have taken some steps internally and some that are within our control to address or mitigate some of these challenges. So in terms of the general crisis-driven reactionary responses, OLIMAP has responded by setting more sustainable boundaries around our ability to respond to crises, structuring crisis response in a way that limits disruption and impacts on our staff, creating as many spaces as possible for people involved in crisis response to plan together, debrief, and also educating ourselves and talking with others about the impacts of urgency and reactionary responses to some of the challenges that we see come up. When it comes to sweeps and displacement, OLIMAP, of course, has very little control or really none at all about when it comes to whether or not sweeps take place. But we have continued to advocate for alternative responses and to educate others about the impacts and try and mitigate harm where we can when sweeps do take place. We have also stepped up efforts to track data related to the impacts of sweeps over the last year. And additionally, we are really actively working to try and identify alternative places for people to go with the intention of decreasing the risk of displacement for those who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so similar to sweeps and displacement, there are limited ways for OLIMAP to increase site control at the existing scattered sites. But we are, again, prioritizing efforts to identify alternative places for people to go where OLIMAP and residents or other stakeholders would have more formal site control. Our partnership with New Hope that Jenny mentioned earlier is a perfect example of that. And also, while lack of alignment among stakeholders has continued to be a concern, we have done a lot of work internally to just, define our own roles and boundaries within the Scattered Site project. And lastly, to better support our staff and minimize staff burnout, we have restructured outreach to increase the amount of staff and support on site whenever we're doing outreach. We've improved policies and procedures related to staff support, increased access to training, and also increased administrative capacity in order to be able to provide more adequate and consistent quality support for our staff. We've again set boundaries around how our workers are able to respond to crises. And last, but probably most importantly, we've also increased the wages of our workers to more fairly compensate them for the work that they're doing, and have also begun providing healthcare for all of our workers. So in addition to the challenges that we talked about in our 6-month review, I also just wanted to briefly touch on 2 additional challenges we've identified. One of those being the lack of broad regional and community alignment in relation to how we respond to camps in our community. In the absence of regional and community alignment for responses to unsheltered homelessness that are grounded in best practices, what we tend to see is a lot of community pressure put on those who are in control of land where people are sheltering themselves to respond to those camps in ways that are essentially antithetical to best practices. And what we've seen throughout the year is that this can create misalignment and conflict among those involved in supporting camp communities, even when they're starting from a common or shared place and approach. Another challenge that we felt was important to address is the ethical conflicts that we have dealt with as social workers and advocates within the Scattered Site Project. So to speak to this a little more, advocacy is essential part of social work. It is our role and obligation as social workers to understand the processes and the systems that impact the people we work with, to assist them in navigating those processes, and to provide advocacy with their best interest in mind as appropriate. It's also, as providers in the field of homelessness, our obligation to use best practices specific to addressing homelessness. And with all of this, OLIMAP's obligations are really no different than other providers, but what is unique to us is that as an organization that works primarily with camps living in unsanctioned areas, the folks living in camps, the systems and the processes that have the greatest and most common impact on the folks we work with are the systems and processes that belong to those who own or control the land that people are living on. And in our area, that is most often municipals or state entities and their respective departments. And so what this means, or what this comes down to, is that we are often finding ourselves in positions that are complex, where we cannot follow through with our responsibilities as social workers without also at times risking the straining of relationships with state and municipal entities or stakeholders, and likewise where we can't necessarily prioritize those relationships and that trust with those stakeholders without jeopardizing the trust and relationships that we have with folks who are living at the camps and our broader community. And an example of that would be, with some of the sweeps and enforcement actions that happened throughout the year, some of the advocacy that we did in those circumstances led to strained relationships among stakeholders. And at the same time, the absence of stronger advocacy or different types of advocacy from us also harmed trust and relationships that we have with folks living at the camps and among our broader support network. So speaking more generally to the challenges mentioned, I think it's important to understand that all are connected and have compounding effects on one another. And the sweeps, the Deschute sweep and the hoteling crisis that followed is a good example of that. So as folks are aware, in December, the Deschute's camp community was closed, and over 70 of those folks were temporarily sheltered in hotels between December and February, March. Thurston County and the City of Olympia covered the majority of the financial cost associated with this, and the City of Olympia was the primary group responsible for managing the guest agreements and expectations, where OLIMAP was responsible for continuing to provide case management services to the 30 people who were already enrolled in case management services, and also to provide some limited additional case management and site support to the other folks sheltered at the hotel. So absolutely, it was the intention for everybody involved in this. The goal for everyone was to support as many people as possible in connecting to shelter or housing before the hotel stays ended. And in the end, OLIMAP was able to support 10 of those folks in connecting to long-term and improved shelter and housing. Also, it's really no secret that this whole situation was fraught with a lot of crisis and challenges. And I wish we could say that those weren't anticipated or couldn't have been, but the reality is, a lot of the the challenges that were attached to the situation were not only predictable, but predicted. And it's not to say that sheltering and housing folks in hotels is in and of itself a bad idea. We think there's a lot of potential there. But what it comes down to is that, a lot of the situations and challenges could have been avoided if adequate time had been given for planning, preparation, and staffing up. So going forward into insights and next steps. So experiences gained throughout the pilot, in addition to a lot of the findings and insights that Jenny went through, led to a lot of insights and findings that we really hope will be considered in regional planning efforts going forward. So our outcomes of our project demonstrated, one, that there is a really high need and desire for case management services among those who are living in camp communities in our area. They also showed that outreach-based case management is an effective way of supporting people living in camp communities with connecting to services and ensuring that access to basic services and support for meeting basic needs is an essential first step for people to make progress towards other more complex and higher needs goals. The outcomes of our project also really highlighted the importance of a consistent place to stay in terms of connecting to services. The outcomes not only showed that having access to a consistent place to stay increases connection to services, but also demonstrated the impact that and disruption that can take place when people lose connection to that stable place to stay. And last, but definitely not least important, one of the main things we learned is the need for alternative shelter and housing options that are compatible with the needs, strengths, and barriers of the people who are living unsheltered and in camp communities. OLIMAP really does see that as a critical piece of connecting people living in unsheltered and unsanctioned camp communities with connecting with housing and shelter. And just to note that a recent literature review completed by HUD had similar findings. And, in that study, they stated that the availability and the type of shelter available seemed to have a pretty drastic impact on the type of, on the amount of encampments that are in an area. So before going into just our priorities and strategies for going forward, I just want to be transparent that OLIMAP does not currently have the funding sources available to continue programs through the Scattered Site Project after June 30th. But in the cases that we are able to continue providing services going forward, the priorities and strategies that we intend to use to inform our operations are to, when possible, continue to mitigate harm and improve the quality of life that participants experience while living unsheltered, improve connections, services, stability, and safety at unsanctioned camp communities, further improve and increase data collection and analysis capabilities, increase community education through outreach and workshops, continue to expand and strengthen community partnerships. And that is a big part of, for us, proactively pursuing legal, safe, and appropriate locations for people to live that are tailored to the specific needs, strengths, and barriers of our unsheltered population. And lastly, we also want to work to promote improved continuity of care and minimize the disruption of services for our participants, despite the ever-changing circumstances that surround unsanctioned camp communities. To talk a little bit about the details for our hopes for some specific sites going forward, for camps like New Hope and Nickerson, where we're able to provide a higher level of site support services, our focus is really wants to be on improving infrastructure and access to on-site resources and services, building up existing collective management and self-governance structures, and also increasing access to case management and the general availability of support. For Nickerson specifically, our hope is to transition that camp to a fully sanctioned site where the residents and OLIMAP for the first time would actually have some more formal site control. And for New Hope, we hope to work with First Christian Church to potentially expand that tiny home village over the next year. For the camps that we work with that are facing more imminent closure of their sites, like Ensign Road, Washdot Wheeler, and Percival, we intend to focus on connecting folks with services, providing advocacy and support in the case that sweeps do take place, identify, create, and potentially operate alternative and shelter housing options for those folks, and also prepare our workers to adjust roles as needed. So for example, if a number of these folks are displaced and not connected to alternative locations, we may transition some of our workers to the roving team to increase capacity on that team and our ability to keep up with folks who are displaced and try and minimize disruption to services. So again, we are at this point potentially looking at having to shut down the majority of our scattered site operations at the end of June. But we are hopeful that, if other sources of funding are identified and we're able to pick this back up again too, that we really think the things we've learned this year and the adjustments we've made are going to just lead to improved outcomes, especially around connections to services. So thank you for the time you took to listen to this, and we really look forward to your questions. So we're open to those now. Thank you.
All right, let me get, there you go. Thanks for stopping your screen share there so I can see who has questions for our OLIMAP presenters. Joan, was your hand up? No, okay. All right, well, I have one question for Ty. I mean, try to put this in the most positive way possible. With loss of funding, if there's a gap of time, how are you going to be able to staff back up in order to take on more?
You may have cut out a little bit at the end, but were you asking basically if there is a gap in services, how we would staff back up to pick up kind of where we left off? Is that the question? Yeah. So yeah, it is something that we've definitely been talking with our staff about the possibility of this for some time. We've definitely been doing what we can throughout the year to look for alternative sources of funding. But of course, as a new organization, I think covering that gap in 1 year is a pretty big hope. So, we've been talking about this, and I know that we have a lot of workers who, if we were, having to shut down services temporarily and open back up, that they would be wanting to come back and pick up with that. And also what we're really working to do, again, our main hope is that we wouldn't have to have disruption in services, but in the case that we do, we're already right now working to try and connect folks with other caseworkers that can pick up processes. But the reality is that there's just really not a lot of other caseworkers or capacity to take on the folks that we're working with. And we have multiple folks who are in the process of housing applications who are going to very likely lose access to caseworkers and support. And that's definitely going to impact those processes. So I think, there's the reality is that if there's a gap, there's probably no way to avoid significant disruption in services for our participants. But I do think that if there was a gap, we would be able to pick back up with staffing wise. As long as, the resources and support were there for that.
Great, thank you. I know it's a challenge in your role. Michael.
Thanks, Carolyn. I guess my question is sort of like if 60% of the residents that were interacted with engaged in some kind of case management services, what's sort of the working theory or the assumption or the hope in which you could get that number to be higher? I personally, I'm not an expert in this field. 60% of folks who've been living outside, living through trauma, engaging with a stranger to accept help seems really good to me. But I'm also then curious, what are some of the things in your mind or tools that, maybe you didn't have available because of additional resources that could have led that to be greater? And maybe that answer is continuity. and more time, if the program lasts longer or something, maybe that number becomes higher because you establish more touches and more connections with people. But I'm just sort of curious about your thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely a part of it. And I'll add here that we actually have wait lists for case management at the other sites at all the sites that we're working with right now. So the 60% there doesn't even necessarily fully capture everyone that wants to access those services. So I think that, Jenny can speak to this more too, but in our view, I think it actually would be possible and probably likely that the number would increase just based on our experience this year, because the main limitation has been our staffing capacity to take on more clients. So we've had to, like I said, have folks go on wait lists for intensive case management while we wait for capacity to open up. So I think that if we had more capacity that way, we likely would be able to support more folks. But of course, right now the priority is keeping a baseline. Yeah. But and then also I think the other thing based on feedback that we got from participants was having even more days just for kind of walk-up services where we could set up a canopy out at the site and just have folks come by without an appointment to check in and do some more basic processes and things like that. So basically just continuing to reduce the barriers and increase access in every way that we can.
Yeah, I'll just add that, definitely from our perspective, and I think Ty will probably agree, a lot of folks don't necessarily want to engage in case management or services because of distrust, because of systems that haven't served them in the way that they needed, because of how frequently they'll work with someone and then that person quits and then they get reassigned and then they get reassigned, and it's just constant disruption of services. And I think part of what's unique for us and why we feel like we could continue to be very successful is that continuity, and is really a much easier when you have relationships with people that are built on trust and time. And the basis of everything we do is based on trust and is participant led. So if we are there on site, if they know us, if they trust us, if we say, hey, I could either help you with a really long, complicated process, or if you're not into that, that's cool. If you want to get a phone someday, let me know, I can help you out. Letting people know through trust and time that you're there to help them with a variety of things is, again, I think another reason why we could predict to see increased levels of case management access if we were to continue.
Yeah, and on that, we weren't starting from zero. I think, while we were an all volunteer organization at this time last year, we were already pretty deeply immersed in the camp communities and doing outreach with folks. So I think that's one of the reasons too why we saw higher numbers than we expected this year, is that we already had a lot of those trust and relationships established.
Yeah. And just a brief follow-up in terms of the 31 folks who entered housing or a different, more sheltered situation, most of them then engaged in intensive case management. Is that number also a reflection of a constraint on resources? If we had more permanent supportive housing available, then that number would be higher. But that is what we have. Therefore, that number is what it is.
Yes, 100%. Yep. And one of the reasons, just to add to that we would even say the number is that high is because we did see some additional shelter and housing capacity from this year with the opening of Unity Commons, for example, which was definitely one of the main places that we ended up connecting folks to.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for answering my questions, and also for everything you both do and everything your organization does.
Absolutely. So Yelm City Council member Brian Hess has his hands up. Brian?
Yes, wonderful presentation. It's good to see the work that you've done, looking at the numbers and what you've accomplished. You stated that by the end of June, if you don't get any more funding, you will be done. But you also stated prior to that, you had people who are in the process of getting into actual shelter or housing that's a little bit more stable. Do you have access to resources or maybe other people that can all of a sudden take over for them? I understand it's a trust issue, but it's to all of a sudden be almost at the top of the mountain and then to just all of a sudden pull the rug out. That completely ruins any and all trust that's out there. So what is your plan for those that are actually ready to just make it into that shelter portion if you don't get that funding?
Yeah, so we are doing everything we can to connect with, well, we have a lot of good relationships and strong relationships with other providers in the area that do outreach services. So we're trying our best to reach out to those folks and connect them with the folks that are at risk of, having that ball dropped for them. And like we said earlier, though, the main barrier that we're coming up against is that even though there's, some folks that are able to help with less complicated processes, we have very few outreach caseworkers in this community. We don't have anywhere near the amount that we need. And most of the ones that are there also already have full caseloads and can't take new folks on. So that's really the main barrier that we're coming up against. But we are, over the last few weeks, we've been having other outreach organizations, outreach workers come out with us more regularly on outreach, both to connect them with those folks and try and help build for that, warm handoff and have some opportunity for that trust and relationships to be built. But so yeah, we are doing what we can, but unfortunately, yeah, there's just not a lot of capacity to pick up that gap in our community right now.
Okay.
Thank you for the response. Appreciate
it.
Yeah. Well, unless anybody else has a burning question, this is about the time we had allotted for this. I really want to thank you both for coming to our meeting today. And I think we all, your statistics and the measure of the work you're doing. And
thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
Really.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, seeing that you're about to run out of funding. This is on our agenda as a information session, but is there a decision that we should be making as the Regional Housing Council around this? I guess I feel confused in that regard. I think Carolyn's froze.
Carolyn froze. Tom, oh, are you back, Carolyn?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It seems I tend to get these little freezes out here. So I was going to ask if Tom could give us a fuller answer on that.
Yeah, so tonight we do not have a decision for the Regional Housing Council to make on this. Later in the agenda, I have kind of an update, and so some more information to come about possible funding kind of in the future, but not an immediate decision for the Regional Housing Council to make tonight on funding.
Right. But Ty, you all are welcome to stay on the meeting and, listen in. So,
absolutely.
anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us again. Yes. Good to
Thanks,
see
everyone.
you all. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
All righty. Next up is the Regional Housing Council and the HAT retreat next steps. And Tom.
All right. Good evening, everyone. A relatively brief update for you on kind of where we sit post-retreat and moving forward with kind of thinking about the RHC governing structure. So as I think we talked about last meeting, the technical team got together and had a mini retreat a week ago Friday, and had some really good discussion. And so in your packets, we kind of have an outline of some processes, and we really talked about it broken down both the kind of a short-term immediate needs, specifically focused on what do we need to kind of around amending the RHC ILA for the new resources and looking at kind of staffing capacity. So what are the short-term things we need to do specifically around amending the ILA, and then recognizing there's some long-term steps towards that goal, towards moving towards a more independent agency. So we've really focused on those immediate short-term steps. And so out of the tech team, we have kind of come up with a draft organizational structure, kind of a flow chart. We're not quite ready to show that to you yet because we want to kind of vet that with a couple groups first. First, we're actually going to be talking to folks in Pierce County who've gone through a similar kind of process. So following up a little bit on the King County conversation, having conversations with Pierce County, getting some lessons learned from them. We also want to engage with the homeless crisis response team work group. So this is a subgroup of the HAT that's focused on the 5-year plan. share it with them, get their feedback and input, as well as talking with the managers and administrators. So the county manager, city managers to get their kind of input before we bring that to you. So we're hoping to do those things in June, maybe into early July. And then in July, we hope to have a proposed interim governance structure to bring to you for your input and approval that will allow us to move forward and provide the direction we need to move forward with amending the interlocal agreement and then moving forward on kind of creating some additional staff capacity. After that, then we hope to kind of revise the ILA with that work focused in kind of July and August, with hoping to have a draft language for the interlocal to you in September. We know kind of final approval, all the councils to actually get that signed and executed will take a little longer, but hoping to have the language basically finalized and agreed on it and bring that to you in September. And then there's some details as we create the structure. We have kind of the high level, the 30,000 foot level kind of structure. There'll be some more work that needs to be done to kind of create the meat on the bone, so to speak, the policies, procedures, operating procedures for some of the structure that we're going to recommend. So hope to have that kind of work happening also kind of late summer and have a lot of that work finalized by October. And then the hope is that steps going through that process really inform, and we'll be able to kind of work on thinking long-term for that long-term process that we want to work on. Really focusing on that in the September to early 2023 timeframe, once we have some of these short-term kind of processes kind of sorted out. So that's the big picture of high-level overview of where we're at. So we will have a kind of a proposed structure to bring to you, or I think we're excited about bringing that to you, but just needs a little more vetting before it's ready for kind of public public reveal. So with that, I guess I'd look to other members of the tech team if there's anything that I missed that you'd like to kind of share, but otherwise happy to answer any questions that folks have. Yeah, Michael.
So is that ILA that you've described also encompass the Olympia Home Fund agreements with the counties for how that'll all be intertwined and will work together, or is that a separate process?
That's included. That would be part of that process as well.
Okay. This is Carolyn. I just wanted to say I'm going to try having my camera off to see if I can limit the freezes on the screen, so that I am seeing you all. Keith, it looked like you had your hand up. No? Okay. Anybody else have a question for Tom? Danny?
Yeah, I really want to thank the technical team for coming together and like bringing this for us. It feels a lot more clear to me, and I just want to do that check-in again around staff capacities. And since you all put this together, I've assumed that you've checked in on your workloads and that this feels manageable to you. But I just want to just ask it directly and just check in and get that temperature check from you. I do worry about burning people out, and then they leave us, and then we're a year behind where we want to be because we lost good people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I kind of look to other tech team members to kind of answer for themselves as well. So I think, yes, this is, I would say, a realistic and aggressive time frame, especially this kind of also kind of ties into our next conversation around the kind of right-of-way funding. That's going to be a heavy lift. So I think we are able to move this forward kind of with our plan. So I think possible. I think we're at our max of kind of high priority, urgent tasks that need to be done kind of over the next several months. So adding another one would certainly kind of impact kind of staff capacity. And I think long-term there's a need to add that. Yeah, I think we're okay to move forward with this plan.
Michael?
One additional question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
So if it's the technical team largely putting this together, does it make sense to have like a subcommittee work on this where there's a member or two of the RHC who is then also involved in this process and can kind of build in some of the general council involvement and support into that process? Or is it kind of the case where that would create more work because of the I guess I'm just sort of curious whether I mean, this is like a big deal, right? This is the future of the structure for how it'll work. I'm kind of wondering if it, you know, would be helpful for the process to have a council member or two involved in sort of that, the longer term development, not the shorter term part. But when we talk about the longer, bigger picture structure stuff, whether it makes sense to sort of have a work group or a subcommittee like we did with, you know, like we did with the citing or like we do with funding stuff to try to kind of formalize that process and some of that support from the council.
Yeah, I'll just kind of, my quick take is yes, potentially, especially as we get into, so kind of presenting, as I said, the 30, 40,000 foot level. And as we work in some of the 10,000 foot level, I think there may be opportunities, there will be some need for some sub teams to work on very specific aspects. And I think at that point, you know, perhaps having kind of elected official RHC members kind of participate on those sub teams would be beneficial. So yeah, I think certainly moving forward and certainly with a long-term conversation, that would certainly be I think an important role for an RHC member to kind of participate in those discussions from early on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Jim's not here, so I'm happy to volunteer him for work. Which I know he volunteered me for when I was absent too.
I'll vote for
I think
that.
a month ago.
Yeah.
I think you'd be pretty good at it too, Michael. All righty. Keely, do you have anything to add on that?
I think Tom did an excellent job
Okay.
summarizing, but thank you.
All right. Any more questions on this topic?
I mean, I think this is informational, but I guess I would just to be clear that I think this sounds like a good plan for moving forward for next steps to look at, you know, this kind of piecemeal. And that, you know, when it does come to time to look at the bigger picture longer term, then yeah, I do think maybe like a subgroup makes sense at that point in time, but not necessarily right now.
Yeah, I agree. But I think what I'm hearing today is very exciting. So it feels like solid steps are being made. And okay, so let's move on to the right-of-way update. Is that going to be Keely or Tom?
Keely will take the lead on this one.
All right.
All right. As we all know, in early June, we began conversations with Department of Commerce to urgently respond to the governor's initiative to remove those living in Department of Transportation right-of-ways that are unsheltered, and priorities given to 2 camps here in our county, and then a number of other camps that are also on the list, but 2 of the top 3 were identified for us here to respond to in a very swift manner. Since we last spoke, a number of every day there's new changes, every day there's new information, but what we do have right now is 2 signed interagency agreements between Thurston County and Department of Commerce to the tune of up to $5 million, about 3.4 million of which is going to Interfaith Works to provide up to 24 beds for 3 years for those being removed from right-of-ways. And then we just released a request for proposals. We will tomorrow, but it was approved yesterday by the Board of County Commissioners to move forward in seeking an outreach outfit to provide 3 years of outreach to the tune of $300,000 per year for 3 years to those living in right-of-ways that are looking to be swept or imminently to be swept, and as well as $200,000 in hotel stays over the next 3 years for those experiencing or actively fleeing domestic violence who are also living in right-of-ways. So we have that as well in hand. I will let Keith enumerate the interlocal agreement that the City of Olympia's council voted on last night, but just really quickly, this is just phase one of a very large plan. The Thurston County has been earmarked to receive $19 million this year, partially in the activities that I have just described, and also in activities around capital acquisition for potential hotel sites and whatnot to provide temporary emergency enhanced shelter stays moving into permanent supportive housing. So an array of actions that are being put forward to Department of Commerce, and these conversations are occurring between Department of Commerce, Thurston County, City of Olympia, City of Lacey, City of Tumwater, and probably another outfit that I forgot to mention on a daily basis at 7:30 in the morning every morning. We were a RFP from the Department of Commerce came out just yesterday afternoon. We have 30 days to put together a proposal to present to Department of Commerce to enumerate, to demonstrate our plan for those $19 million. We have a lot of agency in that and what we want to write. A number of the initiatives that have already been passed or are in the process of passing, or contracts in the process of being signed. We got word this afternoon that the MOU between our region and Department of Commerce will come before that 1 month deadline for the proposal, as well as any contracts that have already been approved can be signed prior to that deadline. So I'll leave that part of the update and look at Keith to talk about the actions that the City of Olympia and your council have taken, and any of the other members of our team to give their perspective.
Thanks, Kaylee. That's a fantastic overview of a very complex and very clunky system, but it does seem to be grinding forward slowly but surely. Last night, Olympia City Council approved an interlocal agreement with the Department of Commerce providing $6.2 million in funding to develop a tiny house village on the Franz Anderson Road property that the county and the city jointly purchased earlier in the year. That $6.2 million includes funding for operations and a significant portion of construction, both for the actual tiny house village and the infrastructure necessary to serve it. So it's an amazing step forward for our community, creating something that's going to have lasting value, both as an emergency housing facility and a supportive housing facility at some point in the not too distant future. So stay tuned.
Keith, how many tiny houses?
We're anticipating creating a 50-unit tiny house village on the east side of the Franz Anderson Road property. The west side will be reserved for a permanent supportive housing facility that's obviously yet to be funded, but this package that Keely referenced earlier, we have talked about asking for some initial funding for Commerce so that we can leverage going forward with the Housing Trust Fund or tax credits, however that might move forward.
Thank you. Michael?
I guess before I ask my question, I wait to see if there's other staff comments before we get to Councilmember questions. No? Okay. So the thing about this I don't totally understand is like what we do. So so these, I mean, we touched on like a lot of different things in there. There's this $19 million plan that's due in like not very much time from now. The county has already approved some stuff. Like what is RHC's role in that process? Will we be voting on this plan and endorsing it for the county commission? Is there not enough time to do that? Or what is sort of, maybe this is a question for Carolina, what do you sort of envision as the interaction between this board and kind of the unfurling of sort of this process and this work?
That question was for me, Michael.
Or anyone, I don't know. anyone who's smarter than me, which is most everybody else on this call, I don't know. I just, you know, this is like a huge deal. It's enormous and obviously has a significant bearing on the future direction of access to housing and services in the county. So just kind of wondering, you know, what is the RHC's role as this sort of unfolds and develops and comes to shape over the next 30 days?
For me, this just shows a success from the RHC and what we can actually accomplish when we work together. I mean, the technical team jumped on this and they've been able to really work really hard on this. Keely and Darian drafted a proposal very quick and I don't know, for me, that just shows the success of the RHC and the technical team and just how great it's been able to work as the technical team has been meeting on a weekly basis. I know it was one of the things that kind of I felt was missing last year. So I feel like this plays a huge, like really does play a huge role for the RHC and for the future and what we get to accomplish from here. You know, in a way, it kind of releases a little bit of that stress that we've been feeling and being the reactive. And I think it gives us the ability to use more funds to other projects and maybe fund, you know, our 5-year plan a little bit more than, you know, we were anticipating this year.
Did that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. And certainly, you know, I think there's been also just a tremendous amount of work from all of our staffs behind the scene that work together on this. And I'm deeply appreciative of that too. I guess like the question for staff would be, is RHC going, you know, at our next meeting 2 weeks from date, will we be voting on a plan? Or is this pretty purely at the county level for approval for what the plan looks like? Because it's the county executing the contracts, not RHC. We don't do that. So I guess that's the technical half of the question.
Rick?
Well,
And then
I can
Romero.
answer. I know Keely has her hand up, but this is going to be in a multi-layered approach. You have the overall MOU that's going to have to be entered into between Commerce and the various jurisdictions, and then the individual contract for specific projects, similar to what Keith just reported out with Olympia's ILA. And so one of the things we've been talking about at the technical team level and you know, our weekly meetings as well as our daily meetings is to try to figure out how we keep the Regional Housing Council informed of progress and figure out that role, if there is to be a role for the Regional Housing Council, other than just being aware of what's going on and how it's aligned with the 5-year plan. But ultimately, it's going to be coming back and forth between not only the county, but each of the cities and informing the Regional Housing Council along the way.
Okay. Keely,
I say Keely has her hand up too.
Okay.
I have a little bit more of a philosophical answer. So I saw that Romero, you raised your hand, so I will defer to you and then I'll give my brief philosophical answer.
Okay, Ramiro.
Now you can go ahead and give your philosophical answer and I'll follow up if you like.
Okay, I just a couple points. One, I can't help but think it's a happenstance and ironic that we had the presentation that we had prior to this conversation around this sense of urgency and how urgency and crisis has been how we've been operating. And I do think it is something that I've been pushing really hard against in terms of the pacing and the timing of this being such a strain and burden on staff and on jurisdictions, and that we're catching you up on all these actions and conversations is indicative of how fast and how urgent this process is moving, and how we want to avoid things that we know can cause more harm in the midst of just being forced to move really, really quickly. And then secondarily, just like this is an excellent, not to be solved tonight, place for I'm so glad you brought this question up, Michael, around like, okay, but what is our role in this? Because all of this is happening outside of us, and yet it feels really a thing that we should be moving towards. And I totally agree with Commissioner Mejia, like we do, like, it's showing that we have done so much work for 2 years to get to this point, and also we're catching you up on this very important thing that's going on around housing and homelessness. So, the end.
All right, Ramiro.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe, at least from the county's perspective, and I can probably talk to the other jurisdictions, for years, we have been asking, where's the state? Where is the state to come and helping us deal with this regional problem? So here we are. I mean, the state has come, has engaged the subcommittee of the Regional Housing Council, a technical committee. They have worked extremely fast and responded to some of a lot of requests the Commerce has put in front of us. And this is a fast-moving train. And I believe that we need to make sure that we continue with this process just to make sure that we have something tangible to bring to the region. I understand, and the Regional Housing Council has a role. And at this point, the role is through the technical committee to trust the experts as to how we need to move forward with this plan. Because at the end of the day, each individual legislative authority will have to approve contracts associated with this. As the Board of County Commissioners approved a $5 million contract to receive the money from Commerce last week. And so, as you heard from Keely, the Board of County Commissioners approved the contract, $3.6 million to give to Interfaith Works. So, and this is something that we need to trust the process. I think we have an obligation as a staff to keep informing and inform the Regional Housing Council, and this is what we did today, and we'll continue to do so. But I think we need to be flexible as to how we need to prepare this plan, making sure that we meet the deadline of, I believe, July 20 to bring a comprehensive plan to access the $19 million. From my point of view, this is a great opportunity, but also have to be looking from the state's perspective. They also have to see the wins of that investment. And that's how they came with a little bit of expectations that we should be cognizant as to how we're going to be meeting the expectations that Commerce has related to this aspect. So for me, from my humble point of view, great news, great position to be in. Let's bank on this opportunity as soon as we can.
Thank you, Ramiro. Tom?
Yeah, and I guess I just piggyback on all that to agree with all that and say that I think the Regional Housing Council, in our conversations with the state, it's been evident that the state has been, I don't know if impressed is the right word, but pleased with the immediate regional response that they got from Thurston County and the coordination between the jurisdictions that was, from the get-go was kind of, so I think the Regional Housing Council, the technical team, the existence of the technical team allowed kind of the region of Thurston County to respond very quickly. And I think that's been recognized by the state. I also would say that as we move forward, it's also been kind of in our discussions with the state that the proposal that we submit to the Department of Commerce is very much almost the opening negotiation kind of offer, and that there will be, by the nature of some of the things that will likely be in the proposal, be kind of very conditional, requiring approval from local jurisdictions that we will not have time within 30 days to get fully kind of processed. So the proposal kind of is a kind of the first formal step in the process. Well, actually, there's going to be an MOU that's going to be coming to the jurisdictions before this proposal is submitted. And then there's going to be kind of additional negotiation and amendments to that MOU and amendments to agreements that follow from this. So I think kind of as Ramiro said, hopefully we can kind of trust the process going forward, and we're putting some trust in the state as they kind of build this as it's trying to get off the ground. So I think, I guess I just kind of say this is kind of continues the process, and even the proposal itself isn't the end of that process and doesn't lock us in. I think there'll continue to be negotiation and refinements and discussions and decisions that will be need to be made after this proposal is submitted.
All righty. Anybody have any other questions for Tom or Keely or Romero?
I've talked a lot, but can I ask like one more follow-up? Just
What's
so
it
with
worth to you, Michael? No, go ahead. I'm kidding.
so with that in mind, I think we have 2 meetings before July 22nd. If there's things in the proposal that also have conditional phrasing or things like that, does it make sense for the RHC to vote to endorse the proposal or to put some kind of stamp of approval on it in advance of the 22nd to demonstrate further regional cooperation or support of the proposal? Or is that sort of redundant because of the MOU process that'll be conducted with the various jurisdictions? Like, is there any step we could take that would put us in a stronger position to demonstrate how committed the region is to try to solving some of the issues? If the answer is no, that's totally fine. I want to be more helpful is the only reason why I'm asking these questions. So,
and I would just kind of jump in to say, we talked about that a little, the tech team, and I'd kind of throw that question back to you. Would it be helpful for the jurisdictions as they're looking at the MOU to have that endorsement from the RHC? So as these things get discussed at a individual jurisdiction council level, would that be helpful? So I'd really I guess I'd look back to the members to ask that question back to you, whether it would be helpful for your jurisdictions to have that RHC endorsement.
What do you think, Michael?
I suppose I'd need to see what the MOU is in order to know what the answer to that would be. The MOUs that we'll get as individual jurisdictions. My presumption would be yes, that would be a helpful thing. Like there's been some issues where, other regional bodies have made sort of similar recommendations or endorsements. The one that comes to mind to me most immediately is like when JASCOM made a regional kind of policy endorsement for banning the private sales of pets, and then all the other jurisdictions adopted that. Kind of demonstrating that there's a regional plan and regional support. I think sort of demonstrates solidarity in a way that couldn't hurt for my council. But that might vary by jurisdiction, and others' experience may vary.
Okay. Brian, do you have a thought on that?
Yes. And in reference to what Michael was asking about that endorsement, here's the challenge that's faced. I don't just represent Yelm. I represent Rainier, Tenino, Okuda, the other cities of southern Thurston County. And so I may not even be able to get, properly be able to say I fully represent Yelm without first going to my council and my council members and saying, hey, this is what we're looking at doing. And, I would like to be able to talk intelligently about it before I even put a vote to it, because I represent southern Thurston County, which is what you guys have put me as, which I've brought up before of, here I'm about to speak for 4 cities with my 1 vote. And it's not, that's the thing, is I've got to go to those cities that I'm supposedly representing and do the job properly, because I'm a representative. I'm not the one that was put up and said, hey, whatever decision you make is the decision we're going to adhere to. Because if I say, hey, I think the MOU is a really great thing, but then out of my 7 council members, 4 of them turn around and go, no, we don't like it and we're not going to do it. Yelm is all of a sudden out of the situation. And I can't even speak for the other cities because I've never talked to their council members or their representatives to find out what they support. So that's kind of the bind I'm in. It'd be nice to be able to see the MOU, to be able to, go through it and be able to at least start a conversation with Yelm City Council members and hopefully be able to get to the other cities as well to find out. But that's just my concern. That's my fears. I put my name on it and say, hey, yeah, this is a great thing. And then all of a sudden it just takes 4 out of the 7 to go, yeah, no, we don't want to do it anymore. And then you lose Yelm. That's just a concern I have.
Okay. Let's see, Andy, you came on. Were you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I just obviously we have to see the MOU first. It's hard to make a recommendation on anything until you actually see the language. And I'd caution for us to get out ahead of our councils as well. So I think the best path forward is get the MOU, have them presented at each of our councils, so we can hear about it. And then, I mean, all the councils are going to have to weigh in sooner or later anyway. So I think let's just follow the regular process. I'd hate to get out in front of the councils on this.
Andy, do you think a draft MOU would be useful?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Danny?
Councilmember Madrone has her hand up.
Yeah, I just, there's a certain point where, like, you know, if process is easy and we can do things fairly quickly, then it can help and bolster. But I'm hearing from other jurisdictions that it might not be so simple, and there's wanting to check in with individual councils. So I'm not sure that that it makes sense to bring things before the RHC. I'm just trying to think, again, staff time, simplicity of process, all of that. But I also wanted to respond to what Brian was saying. I wasn't on when the RHC first formed, but it's not my understanding, Brian, that you represent anybody other than Yelm. Is that accurate? I would think that Thurston County would be the government that represents the cities that aren't at the table. Can somebody clarify?
Well, I was going to say, my understanding is when I look at the paperwork and I look at the things, it says Brian representing Yelm and the other Southern Thurston County. And I brought that up many months ago of how am I representing Southern Thurston County and all, and it was stated that, well, the others didn't really sign on to the original one. So that's where that's where the Yelm representative got placed. And if I misunderstood that, as I said, I brought it up many months ago, and I had that concern that I was representing other cities other than just Yelm.
Is there anyone that can clarify? Because that hasn't been my understanding, but you know, Brian, you would know more about your role than I would. It's confusing to me if that is the case.
Brian, what paperwork are you talking about? Is this the MOU or interlocal agreement, or what?
It's the interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement says that so-and-so represents Olympia, so-and-so represents Tumwater, Lacey, Thurston County, and then it has the Yelm representative with the other cities behind it. So it says Yelm and Southern Thurston County. And I brought that up, and it was explained to me when I asked that question a few months ago. Well, that's just that's how it is because Yelm signed on, nobody else had. And I will, I'm going to quickly bring up the thing to show where that is. Just
Tom or Rick, is there anything, or Ramiro, anything you all can shed on that? You like?
Joan
on the,
has.
on the MOU, on the interlocal agreement?
Interlocal.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Yelm's responsibility to the other cities.
I think Councilmember Hess will bring the language of the interlocal agreement here in a minute.
Carolyn, I'd just like to make an ancient history comment here.
Thank you. Yes.
That, and this, what he's looking up may be a little different, but over the years, different ones of the South County cities have opted out of different things. HHSC and most recently, Tenino wanted to go their own way or whatever. And it was kind of understood that through the previous mayor in Yelm that they wanted to be part of this group and you know, our work together, and that it didn't really have anything to do with the other cities, that the other cities would be handled by the county or something. So that's some of the several years ago, well, maybe not several, year or two ago conversation that lapped over to some of the clearing up of things from years before. So I don't know if, because different members of the county staff, and when John Hutchings was there and we were sharing some of the leadership, he was working hard to communicate with the cities in the South County. The county was doing some good outreach work there. So this has been a little, shifting and not complicated, but that's just a little.
I apologize for, if you go to the website, Regional Housing Council, RHC members, Carolyn Cox, Chair, City of Lacey Council Member, Carolina Mejia, Vice Chair, Thurston County Commissioner, Jim Cooper, City of Olympia Council Member, Michael Althauser, City of Tumwater Council Member, Brian Hess, City of Yelm Council Member, South County Representative. It says it there. There's other locations where it says the same thing. And I asked about that, and that's what's shown on the website that keeps getting updated. That's what people go to. That's why, my concern is you're going to be asking me to brief the cities of South Thurston on this MOU. And as I say, for me to put my name on it and say, yes, fully agree, and let's enact it, I would like to be able to look at it so I can get them to vote on it as well. And as was stated, various cities are pulling out of different, not being part of various elements of it. And I even brought that up during the last meeting when we were talking about the MOU of if certain cities are going to say, nope, we don't want to give up certain funding, or we don't want to do certain things. Okay, how's that affect us as a Thurston County regional element to be able to say this is what we're going to do, except we're not going to go into this city's area. And when they all of a sudden call out for help because homelessness or whatever has all of a sudden hit their area, how do we respond in helping them when they said, no, we don't want to be part of your group, and then all of a sudden they reach out saying, hey, throw us a lifeline, we need some help.
Anybody want to take a swing at that?
Well,
Andy?
so Brian, this goes back to back when Jade was the representative, and how he handled this mostly was he would talk to the other mayors of South County during our monthly mayors forum, and any issue that would come up, we'd have a conversation about it, and then they would go back and talk to the councils, but everyone trusted JW to make the right decision for South County. And so he was sort of put in that position that, you've now come and inherited his position. And, in the past, it was, everyone was comfortable in South County with JW sort of speaking for South County. But now that he's no longer there, I think this is another reason why we need to take a look at the MOU again. All right, and update it, because things have changed. And I totally agree with you, Brian. You should not be representing anyone else besides Yelm. I mean, JW took on that responsibility just because he had the time and he had the trust of the other jurisdictions. But that was never a very good long-term solution to this issue. And so that's why the MOU needs to be updated, needs to be looked at. Each of the jurisdictions need to chime in once again if they want to be a part of it. We're not a part of it, and then you have to let things go where they're at. So it's my 2 cents.
Well, and I would add to that, Brian, legally, the other cities you're referring to have not signed on to the Regional Housing Council, so they are not members of the group. Yelm is. They've been repeatedly invited, and they have not chosen to join or take part in financially supporting the organization. So it feels like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders and that perhaps you shouldn't be carrying that load on your shoulders. And I hope this clears it up for you a bit.
I appreciate that. As I say, it's just the website and various other documents I've seen. And that's why I've brought it up multiple times. And that's why, as I say, the MOU, I agree. That's why I asked the question. If the other cities go, we don't want to be part of, then I have no problem fully representing Yelm. If the other cities say, well, we want to be part of, but continue to have Yelm representing, I'm not comfortable with that because I don't see myself as the person to make decisions for others without getting their input and hearing what they have to say, in particular from their citizens, which I don't even represent. And I noticed that there's two other people that have their hands up. That I apologize for taking up so much time at this moment.
That's okay. Carolina and then Danny.
No, I just want, looking at the time and given that I want to respect, Brian's concerns, I'm wondering if this can be added at our meeting that's set as a work session to discuss the MOU and where to go from there. Might be a good time for us to actually have more time to discuss it, because right now we're still missing the technical report.
I agree. Thank you. And then Danny, quickly.
I want to clarify, like, we're talking about an ILA, right? Not the MOU. Okay, thanks, Ramiro. I saw that nod there. The ILA does not specify that Yelm has any responsibility of representing anybody other than Yelm. So I'm thinking the website needs to be updated and clarified. So I'll just put that out there, but it's not, I got the ILA open right here, and there's nothing in there about Yelm representing anybody other than Yelm.
Okay.
Just one more thing, and I don't think there is no agreement between Yelm and the South cities for Yelm to take the representation of their interest.
Yeah. Okay, so Brian, I hope you can sleep better at night now, and we will try to get that dealt with at a planning meeting to come. And let's move on quickly to the tech team working group updates, Built for Zero and ACI. That'd be Keely.
Yes, so I don't have much to report on Built for Zero because of the time. I would ask if Ariel could be promoted really quickly to discuss the Anchor Community Initiative. The Anchor Community Initiative is the very similar to the Built for Zero, but it's focused primarily on youth and young adults. And there was some funding that was discussed today, and which is pretty exciting. Built for Zero also has a collective impact financial possibility that we can apply for, but it's still a little bit vague as per the level of funding that we can receive. However, Anchor Community is way more specific, and Ariel, just breeze through it if you can.
Yeah, really quickly, just this is a in-process discussion. So like Keely just mentioned, ACI is here in the community, and with them came dedicated money from the Department of Commerce, initially with a $50,000 planning fund that was due to be spent by the end of this month to support kind of the initial rollout of this initiative. So a large portion of that went to funding the hiring of a youth and young adult engagement coordinator, which that position has been filled and is, I believe, hosted with the YWCA and Pizza Clutch as and so this next round of funding, we had a discussion earlier today discussing kind of the timeline around that, and it's $380,000 that's going to be coming into the community to support youth and young adult homeless initiatives. And the timeline for that decision process is in motion right now. So we're looking to host a community meeting and to get youth and young adult engagement and feedback on that plan development to have that potentially by the end of July. And then that plan development to get rolled out, we're looking by the end of August or early September for when that will get finalized. and presented through the various approval channels and then sent through Away Home Washington, which is the host of ACI, through the Department of Commerce. So that's exciting, and we just wanted to give a quick update that those funds are going to be coming into the community, and more update on what those will specifically go towards. It's really broad. There's not really any specific limit to where it can go. So potentially outreach, really broad diversion funding. Other communities have used it for like rapid rehousing. They've also used it for like in-reach, for expanding youth and young adult, like just service provision and community strengthening around that. So a lot of possibility, and it's very exciting that's coming. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have a question for Ariel? Not seeing any hands raised. So Ariel, thank you so much. Keely, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just exciting. There are, and I think I'm about to talk about the HUD funding that's coming in, but just some exciting funding possibilities coming through these initiatives that we're attempting to engage in for our community that will free up other funds. $400,000 to the youth and young adult system is a huge boon.
There you go. I hope the crowd and music noise isn't bleeding through too much into this. I am at an event. Anyway, let's move on to funding. We've got CHG and 1277. I'm presuming that's going to be Tom.
Yep. So that's me. So I teased this conversation a little bit earlier with OLIMAP. So we were notified by the Department of Commerce. This is what we expected from kind of the 1277 funds, the document recording fee, the additional funding we've been talking about. We knew that was coming. So we have been notified that Thurston County will receive $2,471,000 in rent assistance funding. This will be new funding that comes to the county for rent assistance following the conclusion of the TRAP, ERAP funding that is currently kind of out in our community. This program will be kind of the permanent rent assistance program going forward. It is much more narrowly focused than our current rent assistance activities. These funds will be required to be used on those who are at imminent risk of homelessness. There's a specific Commerce definition for what that means. These funds also are required to come with supportive services with those dollars. So our request is that we would like to kind of put out an RFP to award these funds with the expectation that as our ERAP, TRAP funds get spent here probably by August or so, that these funds would be able to pick up sometime this fall with a new program. So we'd be looking for the RHCs to kind of move forward with recommending a RFP, which we would then kind of ask the Board of County Commissioners to authorize us to issue that RFP to identify someone to implement that rent assistance program. We also were notified that we will be receiving $352,940 in additional. They're putting it in our CHG contract, Consolidated Homeless Grant, but these are essentially $1,277. So this is new money, additional $352,000 coming into our community that will be available as of July 1st. So what our recommendation is, and what we're asking kind of for the RHC's approval is, rather than going out with a new RFP for these dollars, for these additional dollars, is this past spring, we had approximately $330 in CHG. We went out and RFP'd those dollars and had, $4 million in requests for those funds. So what we're recommending is to have the tech team go back and review applications that have already been submitted and considered to come forward to you with a recommendation to how to allocate these new funds based on applications that have already been received kind of in the last, that were received in April, for kind of reviewing those applications and making funding awards. Multiple organizations submitted applications, including OLIMAP, but others as well, for this funding. And so what I propose is that the technical team is going to be meeting July 6th, Keely, is that right? To review the outreach under the right-of-way funding applications. And so we would propose to come to you in early July with a recommendation for how to allocate this additional $352,000 based on the applications already received and reviewed by the RHC.
Okey doke. Everybody good with that? Okay. We've got
I
about
think Carolina, sorry, I saw Carolina.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Carolina.
No worries. I guess I just wanted to relay my recent experience that I just had. I went down to the Nickerson and Wheeler site with OLIMAP and talked to many of the residents that live in in those places. And I was just really surprised and at how well OLIMAP and all of their staff really know the residents who live there. They are really on top of everything. And it was just very impressive to me. And so I'm excited that there's this additional funding coming through because I honestly would love for them to continue the work that they're doing. Because it was, if you haven't been down there and met some of the residents, I would encourage you to meet them and hear their stories and see basically how OLIMAP has definitely just helped them. And it was just very insightful. So I'm just advocating, I guess, if we have additional funding, that it should go to an organization that is really doing great work.
Thank you, Carolina. Anybody else? Okay, we have a couple of minutes for good of the order here.
And I just, sorry, before on funding, I'm going to ask Keely to give a brief 30-second update on what she just teased about additional funding from HUD.
All right, so this afternoon or this morning early, the Biden administration announced their first ever funding opportunity for coordinated approaches to address unsheltered homelessness, including resources for rural communities. That's $322 million, including a $54.5 million set aside for rural communities for permanent supportive housing, supportive services, and other costs, including outreach, shelter operations, et cetera. And then there's also, the package also provides $43 million to fund approximately 4,000 new incremental housing choice vouchers. So there's no timeline yet attached to this announcement that came out from HUD today, but it's really exciting. And what is also exciting about this is that it will be coming through the state through our COC. The funding initially will be for 3 years of that program, and then will be eligible for renewal. We have a number of programs in our homeless crisis response system already that get COC funding on an annual renewal. And once you're in, the renewal isn't necessarily guaranteed, but it's highly probable. So getting those, getting our applications in as soon as the timeline is released will be incredibly important for our community, and it's just a really exciting announcement. So I thought I'd bring your attention to that.
Woohoo! Can't have a better good of the order than that. Okay, anybody have anything else they want to share? Not seeing any hands raised. All right. Well, thank you all, everybody. And put the screen on again. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. If no
All
one
right.
else will.
I'll second it.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. See you in a few weeks.